Well, why don't we get started? I'm sure some people will trickle in as we move forward. Uh, I tried my hardest to try to get some interest just based on the title of this meeting alone, and the dentist struggle was the thing that I feel like I resonated with the most, in great part because I struggle. I've been doing this 18 years. There's not a day that goes by that I don't feel like there's a part of the day where I feel ill prepared, both from a mental and physical perspective, to kind of weather the storm, to make sure that at the end of the day, I'm the best version of myself when I go home. It's not a secret that in dentistry we hear about the suicide rate in dentistry being a real thing, and I to this day don't know how valid those numbers are. But I've had a few friends in the past, 3 years. When I say friends, colleagues of ours, that have taken their life for one reason or another. And I don't mean to start this on a melancholy note, but it's really to just emphasize that there are a lot of tools that we can gain from reading books, watching YouTube videos, speaking to colleagues that are experts in certain arenas to get better at weathering the storm throughout the day. And one of the analogies that I use for my personal journey is the concept of the gas tank. So I wake up in the morning and I need to have a start with a full gas tank. And if I don't start with a full gas tank, I ask the question, why didn't I? Was it poor sleep the night before? Do I have a lot going on in my personal life? But then as the day goes on, if I start with whatever gas I start with, I want to end the day with as much as possible. And the reason for that is we need to come home and we need to be a husband or a spouse, a son, a daughter, a parent, a friend to a neighbor. Uh, when we're in this such challenging profession, it's easy for us to just kind of lose some gas in the gas tank and show up as a lesser version of ourselves. So many of us, as I'm sure many of us that are here can attest to, there's things like exercise and meditation and good eating that are pretty obvious things that we hear about each and every day. But where I find this conversation to be rather insightful is Dr. Din is a dentist. And he's not only a dentist that eats, breathes, and sleeps what we do and walks the walk that we do each and every day, but he's also a health coach and one that uses what I would consider modern medicine, functional medicine, or as Peter Attia calls it, medicine 3.0. Basically an upgraded version of understanding how the body works and how we can tap into it to show up well throughout the day so that we're maximizing how much gas we have in the tank. And Dr. Dinh has become a very good friend of mine over the past couple of years as we share challenges together. And I have nothing but admiration for how he navigates through life at such a young age. I'm probably 10 years older than him, and I look up to him like he's a mentor of mine. So I'm very excited to announce Dr. Peter Dinh. A lot of this is free form, so if you have questions, feel free to pop a question in the chat bot here, and I will ask the questions as they arise. But without further ado, Dr. Peter Dinh, would you introduce yourself? How did you end up in this world of functional medicine and how it intersects with you as a dentist?
Well, thanks, Nick, for the kind introduction. I feel honored to be able to speak in front of such high-level people. I checked out the YouTube page that you had, and it's very detailed and very high-level stuff. So I'm glad I'm amongst colleagues like you to be able to share some of the experiences that I've gone through just to try to contribute to the community. And so thank you for allowing me to be part of this community. I guess it kind of starts out, life in academia was always a struggle for me. I didn't know why I had such trouble with focus. I thought everyone just has focus issues and that kind of stuff. And what would it translate to? It would translate into going to the library for 6 hours and like getting 2 hours out of it. And I just thought this was normal. Thought everyone was like this, right? Fast forward, dental school was a challenge, obviously. And sorry, excuse me, my throat is a little bit. Sorry about that. Apparently that flu that's going around, the whole family got it a week ago, and we were knocked out for like a week. So my 2 kids, 4-year-old, 2-year-old, and my pregnant wife all got like pretty beat up about it. But anyways, yeah. So in school was always a challenge. I always had focus issues. I didn't know what that was about. I just assumed it was normal. Fast forward to practice ownership. Practice ownership, like everyone at the beginning, was very difficult. I always seemed to wake up with this feeling of guilt, this strange anxiety that always kind of sat with me. I didn't understand why. And so what it made me do is I got hyper focused in personal development, basically studying, all the famous people that you guys hear about, the Peter Thiels, the Hubermans, all the super successful people, like what do they do to try to like grow their business? But I always felt like something was missing and I didn't know what it was. But I had this guilt that I kept going back to of not being enough. And I just kept going on day to day with questions. Fast forward some more. There's a point to all this. I was fortunate enough to grow my 2 offices to the point where I got to get freed up from the dental chair a little bit. I was working 1-2 days a week, and I also freed up my wife as well. And so she started to pursue functional medicine. And for those of you that don't know, functional medicine, the premise of functional medicine is basically to look at and find out the root causes of disease. So if you go to your doctor now and you have, high cholesterol, they say, oh, here's this cholesterol pill. Your body's clearly missing this cholesterol pill to get better, right? That's the approach of conventional medicine. And I think there's a time and place for conventional medicine. It's just that we typically don't solve the root cause of things. And so as she got into that realm, I started to get testing done. So when I got the testing done and I was able to find out that I had low dopamine, low serotonin, I had leaky gut, and had yeast overgrowth. And so apparently those things take away focus, and apparently those things cause me to have like this weighted guilt and this weighted anxiety. And so I was trying to solve for my anxiety, guilt, and low energy with like optimizing performance. Let me wake up at 4 a.m. every single day. Let me do the cold showers. Let me do the meditation. Let me do the journaling. Let me do everything I can to feel good so that I can feel better, so that I can perform in my dental practice. And so what I didn't know was I was optimizing for something that was completely not the root cause of it. And so as a result, I got really good at, I'm sorry, my throat is like, I have like this thing or something that as I talk more, phlegm builds up. So after I got those things fixed, I got my leaky gut fixed, I got my yeast overgrowth fixed, which apparently is the cause of, 60 to 7% of anxiety out there, which is a mind-blowing number. The guilt went away. The focus started to dial in. I didn't have to fight myself to do the things that I wanted to do. I noticed when I got home, I felt kind of burnt out, and I wanted to avoid my family in some regards. And at the time, I just thought I was like a bad parent. But now that I realized that my body was trying to compensate for having low dopamine, basically not having willpower anymore, feeling burnt out, and being in that constant state. And so what my body needed was disconnect from people so that I can replenish my neurotransmitters. So that kind of opened up my window, my world to a whole different way of operating. It was almost like the light has turned on, like a sixth sense, not to this degree, obviously, but it's like you couldn't see before and now you can see, my willpower was dialed in. I could connect to fulfillment more. My anxiety went down. And so I say that all to say is that I think I have a very unique perspective of like trying to solve for low energy, suffering, and pain, when it was other things like, my neurochemistry, my biology, my leaky gut, and things of that nature. And so I went hardcore into the personal development world to try to solve my issues. And as a result, I think it really has lit me up. I now work like 2 days a week in the office, in my 2 offices. And I do a lot of health coaching, performance coaching, because that's what brings me fulfillment. I enjoy seeing high-level people get to their next level, and that brings me a lot of joy. You know, that type of puzzle and problem, and how a person navigates their world to solve their own issues is the things that light me up. And so that's kind of a little bit about myself. And if anyone wants to stop me at any point, you can, because I can rant on for an eternity. My boss tells me.
Yeah, Pete, if you may, you talked about guilt being one of the components of your character or your inner being that you were trying to fix early on. Uh, Imposter syndrome comes to mind as a condition that professionals often have, and I suffer from it myself. You know, without getting into maybe some of the more personal sides of guilt, can you speak to how that guilt played a role in your professional life as a dentist, and what you did and what you've noticed as you started to kind of segue away from the guilt?
Yeah, great question. And it's interesting how it was solved, because I definitely found a mentor that helped me solve that puzzle. But for me, it was basically every day I'm showing up and I just feel like it was not enough. I learned very early that you can do 100% of the work and you can spend every second of the day and it can still not be good enough. So that thought, kind of like the movie Inception, kind of stuck with me for a long time. And day to day in the practice, it would show up as like, oh man, there's a million things to do. There's a million people to manage. There's a million like things to worry about. I mean, pick your poison, the clinical, the team, the leader, the family, like there's a million things to do. And it just felt like I wasn't doing enough. I wanted to do more. I even like wrote down and quantified it. But when I did the thing that I said I think would be good enough, it just didn't feel good. I wasn't proud of the work that I did. I didn't connect to fulfillment well. What I learned in the past was that I almost like disconnected that part out of myself because of how hard some of the things that I went through. And so basically I closed myself off and I had to reopen myself in order to reconnect to things like fulfillment and to let go of guilt. So one cool exercise that was suggested to me was to write down everything that I was proud of over the last 20 years. And then after you write down each thing, just read it and see how you feel. And that provided like a good window for me. Like, I'm reading these things and I feel nothing. Like it was like, oh man, I accomplished this really cool thing, but I'm on to the next thing. So just like seeing how I operated, which was not celebrating the wins, which was a muscle that was probably underdeveloped in me at the time. So it was a good exercise. So connecting with the good things that I did, really sit with the thought, and then try to explore the actual feeling, right? Like you can, like if you win the lottery, you have this feeling of elation, right? But if you see your kid do a project and they're really happy, you're like a little happy if they've done it like a million times. But if they don't for the first time, you're happier, right? So I say that to say that there's different degrees of how deep you can go within an emotion. And so the exercise for me at that moment was to go deeper on those emotions and to visit it more so that I build that muscle so that I can connect to fulfillment and connect to being prideful in my work. Hope that answers your question.
That's beautiful.
And on like voodoo-y way.
Yeah, I think most of the people that know me know I like to get kind of esoteric in my thinking, you know, out of left field, in great part because that's where my growth and journey has really kind of blossomed. And what you just talked about, the idea of exercising the emotional muscle, is a concept that I think the world needs a lot more of. When we think of exercising or working on a muscle, we think of a musculoskeletal development of a muscle based upon lifting a heavy weight. But any of us who have meditated, it gets easier as we do more of it, and that's just a form of exercising. And what you just talked about was diving deep into your emotions as a form of exercise to get better at it. And the more that we do whatever we're trying to do from this more emotional perspective, the easier it gets. And there's books written on all of this stuff, but it just, for whatever reason, doesn't permeate at least American society to any extent. I don't know if there's just a taboo associated with it or not. But once you find yourself connected by people who, either have spiritual faith and they kind of tap into these resources from that perspective, or from other avenues, you just see people grow around you. And you're somebody who, I think you and I in tandem have just, anytime that there's a discovery that happens, it's super exciting, and it's good to have that support network around you. Can you talk about your network of people? Do you find that having friends close by that speak the same language make it easier to, kind of build the fortress and make yourself stronger?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you can go back to a million different quotes that support that. You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? You talk about the muscle that you've been working out, and, people in this group talking about high level dentistry, it only keeps leveling up everyone. And so the challenge is that a lot of times we don't go to the vulnerability side of ourselves. We see it as weakness, when we also know that vulnerability is actually a huge strength. It means that people want to try to help you, and you show that part of yourself in a safe environment, And so, like the community that you've built, if you're talking about these things and building those muscles, it only makes you more resilient. I mean, think about it, right? You have different groups talking about, like, oh, let's talk about how to get the proper VDO in this, full arch case or whatever, right? And the blessing that we have together today with all of us is that we're talking about how to optimize, like, our emotions. How often do we get to talk about those things? And so I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. Like, let's figure out how to not get triggered throughout the day. Like, let's actually objectify this. Let's nail this down. We can totally do it. If that, that's what you want to do, do that today.
Yeah, I would love to tackle that specifically. And, as somebody who wakes up every morning and has full intentions on just making the world a better place, I was awoken one day when I had 2 assistants. This was probably 11 years ago at this point. I had 2 assistants come up to me, and they basically had an ultimatum that if I ever showed up like I did earlier that day, that they were going to quit. And I had this epiphany. I was like, you guys must be wrong, because I show up perfect every day. And it was a point in my career where I had to realize that how I showed up to others was very different than what I thought. And one of the things that I think we could focus on a little bit is just the idea of how to show up in the operatory, one for the patient, but also for the assistant. And one of the concepts that we talk a lot about in this organization and in our practice is the concept of making sure that those in the room feel heard, feel taken care of. But if we're not optimized ourselves, we're not going to have the time and energy to really care about other people. So when we entered the room, and you and I had talked about kind of the prototypical situation that patient shows up late first thing in the morning, you have 2 hygiene exams, one of the patients wants to show you pictures of her granddaughter's soccer team, so on and so forth. We've all had those days where it just seems like it's death by 1,000 cuts. What are the things, what are the mindsets that we can have to just be stronger in those moments when it just seems like everything's falling apart around us?
Yeah, it's kind of a loaded question. The way I kind of dissect it is into 3 different kind of buckets, right? There's the positive approach, there's the neutral approach, and then there's like the negative approach in my mind. At least this is what's showing up for me. The positive approach is, I think something that's probably most familiar for people, which is like, how do I just be in a good mood at the beginning of my day, and then slowly it just goes down over time, right? Let me take a vacation, disconnect, have space so that I'm less triggered. Let me, if you want to go more, ethereal, whatever, you could go towards let me have positive thoughts at the beginning of my day so that I start with my container full. What does that look like? You can do the gratitude journal. You could, speak things that are appreciation, like speak out loud. If you want to go towards like the positive side, the mind positive side. There's also like the physical side, the biochemical side, if you want to approach it that way. Obviously, we know exercise is good, but how does one feel with certain different types of exercises? I know that if I'm doing if I have a high stakes conversation where I get easily triggered, then I might approach it with something really hard and challenging in the morning that releases all of my different emotions and sweat, right? So for me, that's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. For me, that's like a heavy lift or sprints, something that like is physically demanding so that it releases a lot of that anger energy out, right? So it depends on what you're trying to optimize for. It's a very loaded question. Like we can go like hours and hours and hours on the different parts of it. But that would say like in the positive realm, like getting your body prepped for the day is everything, all those high stakes conversations beforehand where, like, this hygienist or this assistant, we always get triggered whenever we have a conversation here. Like, let me plan that out. So that transitions into maybe like, how do you handle like the negatives? I'm going to write down all of my triggers and try to see it in the future, and then try to imagine a different response. So something like that allows you to relive that experience. You're building a muscle, just like practicing the piano, right? You're practicing the piano to prevent yourself from getting triggered by creating a different future when you see yourself get triggered, right? So there's a million different things you could do, from exercise to the mental component. I mean, you mentioned meditation, which if there's one thing everyone walked away from this conversation, and if everyone started meditating after this, I'd feel like I helped cure cancer or something. I think it was like it was one of the super like success, the 4-Hour Workweek guy. I think he like did a poll of all the entrepreneurs that had like certain net worth, and he said, what were the top 5 things that you would attribute your success to? All of them said meditation. Like, well, that was one of the like most consistent things. And meditation, that was kind of voodoo-y at first, but I noticed that meditation builds like a suit of armor around me where I can see what's happening but not have a reaction. It's almost like I can choose to have a reaction whenever I want. And I found that to be pretty valuable with, pick your thing. Case acceptance, talking to a team member, getting triggered, coming home from work already tired. Like, there's something about letting your conscious mind rest and slowing things down. And when things slow down, it's like you see the world moving slow motion and you just don't have a reaction to it. So whenever I'm about to have like a really, like, I'm about to let someone go, or I have this hygienist that, man, I just can't get them to take the x-rays correctly or whatever, right? And I need to have a conversation that will lead to someone like throwing stones or something. That meditation beforehand has been crucial, has been just game-changing for me. So those are some suggestions. Of course, I can go deeper on those things if you guys have questions about it.
Sure. I can echo the fact that meditation slows things down for me immensely, and it slows things down for me particularly in the heat of the moment. So we get that angry patient who's in the chair. We walk in and they're just loaded for bear. They want, they're looking for a face to smash, and you're the person that walks in. And there's something about when you take a deep breath that your body goes into a different pattern, and that pattern allows you to really slow things down. So, to kind of to circle back to one of the concepts that's starting to emerge here is the art of practice and the art of exercising the emotion. And I think meditation is one of those things where, if you tell somebody to meditate and they've never done it or appreciated it before, they might just think, you're just taking a nap for 15 minutes. You don't want to think about anything. On the contrary, what you're actually doing is you're developing like you had said, an armor around you where you're just less bothered by the stresses of the world, in great part because you're able to slow it down and deflect it, almost like Keanu Reeves does in The Matrix. And I think you and I would agree that that's almost what it feels like. When you really develop that skill, you're sitting chairside with somebody and 13 things are happening all at the same time that really any one of them will make for a bad day. If you can segregate those into compartments and put them to where they need to go and deal with them at a later point in time, that is a superpower. And I think meditation is really the gateway to kind of developing the part of us that weathers those storms, a lot more freely. Can you speak a little bit more about, so you had taken the flow state training, Stephen Covey. Can you talk about who he is, the book, the continuum that you took, and some of the concepts like friction and lubrication, and how you apply those to your day?
Yeah, sure. I guess just curious, how many people know what flow state is? Do you, right now I have 4 videos in front of me. I got Zachary, Ray, Stacy, and Andrea, it looks like. Do you guys know what flow state is? Okay. Okay, thumbs up. Some do, some don't. Okay, perfect. Then I'll just go, we'll start at the beginning. So flow state is basically a state in which the action that you're doing doesn't require much energy or no energy. And so one example that you may have heard of is the runner's high, right? So if you're a runner, you start jogging, at the beginning, you kind of hate your life. Like, it's like, oh, this is pretty painful. Like, you can feel and you're just like, oh, I don't want to do, like, I just want to stop, right? But you hit a certain point, everyone hits this point differently, but you hit a certain point where it's almost easy to run. You don't have to fight yourself anymore. You're just going. You're just flowing. This is flow state. Another example is if you're studying or if you're doing work, right? At the beginning, sitting down doing work is very challenging. You're just like every part of your body is just like screaming and you just don't feel like doing it, right? But after you start getting some work done, knocking out some emails or whatever, you hit a point where everything is easy, where you're just going. And then you look up at the time, and sorry about that, guys. You look up at the time and you notice like 2 hours went by. You were in flow state. And so this idea and this person that Nick was mentioning, he's a person that studies how to get into flow state and maximize flow state as much as possible. Because if you're in flow state, things don't require energy from you and you're like 10 times more productive. So how do you replicate flow state is basically the premise of it all. And so this guy, he's one of like 3 different high-level researchers that hooked up a bunch of brain monitor measuring devices to try to track and understand the brain as you get in and out of flow state. And there's a lot of neurotransmitter like work measurements. So he basically built like an indoor wave pool and then like had people surf, and he just like measure at the beginning, he just like measure all these things to try to understand like what's going on in the brain. And then he would do experiments to try to replicate flow state. And so one of the concepts of flow state is this idea of friction and lubrication. So friction obviously is things that like slow things down, like drag, right? So he talks about how like every decision that you make, everything that you do throughout your day requires a certain amount of energy. On the things you don't feel like doing, it's one of 2 reasons. One, the task is too difficult, so it requires more activation energy. I like to think about activation energy because we're science geeks in a way, right? So their activation energy is too high because the action is too difficult, or your energy is too low. Biochemically, you're insufficient in doing the action. So think about when you're like in my example, which was like low dopamine. If you have low dopamine, you have no willpower. So if you have no willpower, it's hard for you to get yourself to do things. You'll notice that at the beginning of the day, you have more willpower, versus at the end of the day, you tend to feel like not doing many things, right? And so this concept of friction is basically to put things in place so that it's harder for you to do the thing. So for example, if you have a habit of drinking alcohol and you really want to cut down alcohol, but man, you just keep going back to the alcohol. You don't know, it's just easy to do, right? So one friction thing that you can do is throw away all the alcohol out of the house, so that if you wanted alcohol, you'd have to physically go to the store, you got to go buy it, you got to bring it home, and then you got to have the drink, right? So you added layers of friction in there to change your behavior. So you can do this in the positive or in the negative. So in this example, it was in, like removing a behavior that you don't want. But you can also add things too. And so you can play around with it. So in this world of friction and lubrication, Typically we think about the habits and all the things that the day-to-day that we go through. I guess in the dental practice, friction would be de-incentivizing bad behavior, right? So if you have an assistant that keeps coming to you and be like, hey, did I take the x-rays correctly? You could say, yes, you took it, or no, you didn't take it, right? Add no friction to the mix. Or you can say, like what are the parameters for the ideal like x-ray thing? Like what's the ideal here? What are you trying to get, right? So you're adding friction in so that they don't have to ask you and they have to learn how to do it. So you're influencing friction, or you're using friction to help you in the positive sense. So there's all sorts of things you can play around with. You can add friction or lubrication to like exercising. You have your clothes set out, you have your shoes set out for running, you have the water ready, you set your alarm, you actively made the thought of I'm going to run at this time. All of those things lubricate the process and increase the probability that you actually do the thing. Because when you wake up, it's going to be based on how you feel. And so based on how you feel, if your energy is lower than the activation energy of the action, you're not going to do it. But if you removed a lot of the friction and you added lubrication by putting in, the shoes, you're wearing the clothes, you set the intention, all of those things, that lowers the activation energy and lubricates the system so that you have a higher probability of doing the thing. So on a super basic level, that's what it is. I would say just as an exercise, if some people could think of some things that they could add friction or lubrication to for their life, what would it be? Like what things show up for you? Just so you can like nail in the learning lesson, I suppose.
I'd be happy to share one of my examples. So you had shared this concept, it must have been just over a year ago in our group. And what I had decided to do was to take my protein, my flaxseed powder, several things that I consider healthy for me in my optimization. And I created a space where nobody's allowed to go into that space. It's a cabinet where I have my stuff. I know when I go in there, it's going to look exactly the way it did when I left. And I don't really ask for many spaces in my house like this. And of course, my wife didn't want to give up one of her 17 cabinets because she's the one that cooks every day. But when I made the case to her and said, look, this is going to be optimizing my day by creating a lubricant. In other words, I'm going to open this cabinet and everything's going to be right there. And the feeling I have when it's there is euphoric in nature almost. And it's a self-perpetuating habit builder where I can't not do it anymore. It's an amazing feeling. So once you start lubricating your life for good behaviors or using friction to your benefit to remove negative behaviors, it's super powerful. And I can't thank you enough for bringing that concept to me earlier on. And at some point I'd love to dive into Stephen Covey's work to the extent that you have. Because there's a lot there. I think you're just hitting the high points, but at the end of the day, there's a lot there to be learned.
Yeah. No. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, and you can do this exercise with a million different things. So where I would start is, what habits do you want to see go away, and what habits do you want to see more of? And then ask the question, how can I add lubricant or friction to it to do more of it or do less of it? I mean, it could be as simple as, like, for instance, like I take a bunch of supplements, right? Having the supplements out so where it's like 1 week versus 1 month, right? So I don't have to like open the bottle, change it out every single time. And with that extra energy, it's the little things added together. I will have more willpower to do harder things, to have more difficult conversations with employees or team members that I need to, or to not avoid the conversation that I've been needing to have with my wife or my parents, right? Like, we naturally avoid things, and it's because of the neurochemistry. And friction and lubrication is a great concept that you can apply to like every aspect of your life. I mean, you could really geek out about it. So
Yeah, earlier, Pete, you were talking about dopamine. Can you talk about the dopamine connection with gut health, most specifically the genetic deficiency that you had or have, and how you overcome it? But more importantly, what can we learn as a group of people to understand that gut health has everything to do with really mental health, but specifically dopamine and serotonin.
Yeah, I think the thing that was most surprising to me was that like 70 to 80% of your neurotransmitters are created in the gut. Like, let that sink in for a second. 70% of your happiness is because of your gut health. So when we think about these things, there are specific bacteria that recycle estrogen. What do you think happens if you don't have that bacteria? Right? So like a lot of these things are out there. We're not paying attention to it, like as a society, partly because of big pharma, right? But there are solutions out there for ADHD, the neurodegenerative diseases, all of the autoimmune diseases that we say are autoimmune, but really it's like leaky gut and like bad things leaking out into the like skin, right? A lot of those things are very, very solvable within like a 3 to 6 month period. All the IBS, all those syndromes with your gut, it's all related to the biochemistry, the gut bacteria that's living inside you. They call it the second brain. And so for me, it's been a game changer. I didn't realize like the amount of self-awareness that I gained after my gut was healed. And it was directly because of the neurotransmitter amount that of like the amount of neurotransmitter I had in the gut, right? And the beautiful thing is that we can't measure it directly, but you can measure it indirectly. Meaning, the chemical components of what makes serotonin, and you can see A plus B plus C equals D. Well, if A is low and B, C are normal, then you have to optimize for A. And so that's the premise of functional medicine, which is like just figure out where you're lacking in these things, and then you just feed the body what it needs, and then it typically heals on its own. I mean, that's such a wonderful thing. And so, yeah, I mean, I have a very interesting relationship with dopamine just because I feel like I've operated at low dopamine for so long. And so the way in which I operate, like I get things done. In the past, I got things done due to obligation and not because of desire. And it makes sense. And like now the whole story makes sense, because if I'm low dopamine and I'm low serotonin, I don't connect to fulfillment that well. Well, I don't get things done unless it's like things are really hitting the fan and like obligation energy goes through. Now it's different. Now it's like, okay, it would feel good if I did this thing. I love that future that I see. I kind of want to create that future. Let me do this thing that creates that future. And so I can like live in that much easier, more naturally, versus like, okay, I got to wait till like I start having anxiety, panic attack, and then I can get things done, and it's really unhealthy to operate like that. So. But yeah, gut health. I didn't realize that my zonulin levels, like zonulin is basically a measurement of the inner lining of your gut. And so if you have leaky gut, I didn't realize this, but I was shedding a lot of zonulin. Like I had a lot of zonulin in my tests. And when I asked my wife, like, hey, what does that mean? She was like, oh, it means that like you have leaky gut, like you have holes in your gut because something is attacking your gut. And so I found out I had like a mild gluten allergy. I had, dairy allergy. Obviously, and I would eat cake every once in a while. I wouldn't think anything of it. So I took a lactase pill to help break down the dairy stuff. Took some things to heal the gut, and how I wanted to not avoid my family anymore because I want to connect with them. So,
on that note, I'm going to share a story about you that I find fascinating, and one that I draw a lot of inspiration from. And it has to do with something you did recently that took you away from your family. Without diving into that, and feel free to do that if you want to. But what I took away from it, you were so intentional about carving out time in your life where most people in this day and age would consider taking any time away. When you have two young kids under the age of 4 and another one on the way, how did you get to the point where you realized that taking the oxygen, the oxygen mask theory, if you're on an airplane with your little one and there's only one oxygen mask, what do? You take the oxygen from the oxygen mask. And I think you use that concept in your personal life that I think is so high level that it's almost unfathomable how powerful it is. So can you speak to what led you to take that time for yourself in such a time in your personal life where you were needed in many other places?
Yeah, man, it's so interesting to hear you give me my flowers for that decision, because I don't think too much of it, which is, part of the reason why we have such a great friendship. You can remind me and connect me to things that I could take a look at. So what Nick is describing is basically I took a 1 week vacation away from my family. I did a 3-day meditation retreat, and then I spent the next 7 days, or it was like 10 days. It was 10 days. And then so 3 days of the meditation retreat, and then 7 days of I get to do what I want and figure out what I want to do and plan out my life. And so to answer your question, I feel like a lot of us in this room and in the field of dentistry, we're the leaders of our family in some regard, and as the leader, I felt like something was missing. Like I wasn't planning. Like I was missing something in my operating system, and I wanted to try to figure out what that was. And it was suggested to me a long time ago that when you go to another place and you know nobody and you have no identity, you get to recreate your identity. You get to reset it. Similar to the concept of if you want to organize a room, you don't organize the room with all the stuff in it. You take everything out and then you place one thing in at a time. And so my intent with that was to recreate my identity so that I could be a better version of myself, so that I could be better for my family, knowing that I'm, on certain responsibilities I'm the leader of. And I felt like I needed clarity on those things. And so I basically, it's funny because I went into the meditation retreat thinking, okay, I'm going to do this meditation retreat and then I'm going to plan out my life. Like everything's going to be dialed in. I'm going to business plan the next 10 years and everything. Like that's what I'm going to do. Right. And then I leave the meditation retreat and then they basically teach you, don't plan anything, just feel your way through the world. And I'm like, well, shoot, like this was a completely different expectation than I had. And then now I get to make a decision to lean into it or not. Do I want to invest into developing feelings, developing my feelings further, my fulfillment side, so that my family, so I can move my needle on the family? Is that what's missing? Or is it the business planning, And so it took a lot of setup. It took a lot of setup and alignment. I feel like one of the things, I do a lot of things wrong, but one of the things I feel like I do well is that I have a really good relationship with my parents, my family, and my wife. Like everyone understands what the goal is. Everyone understands what the goal is. So all of us are trying to row in the same direction. And so when I proposed it to them, not a single person gave pushback, not a single person questioned it. They knew what, Peter doesn't just go off into the world. He doesn't take many vacations, first of all. He doesn't enjoy a lot of vacations in the past version of Peter. And so if he's doing something like this, we know that it's for the family. And so getting everyone aligned and knowing exactly what the goal was part of the success of sticking the landing to it. Of yes, having a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a pregnant wife that is due in a month. And this was in January, so she was, 7 months, 6 months pregnant. But organizing it with all of my family, hey, can you take care of her on this day? And, organizing it all made me feel good about trying to reset my identity, because I'm a nobody over there. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a husband. I'm not a son. I'm just Peter, a guy that's doing meditation, right? And so I got to understand what lights me up, reconnect with that so I can come back stronger, more motivated for my family. So
Beautiful.
Yeah.
For those that are listening that would consider a 10-day jaunt probably a little too much, what would be the minimum amount of days where one could really hit the reset button? Not everybody wants to go find a different identity or remove their current identity. I think we'd all have different purposes of why we would take such time. But what would be a, kind of a good stepping block in the right direction for somebody who probably doesn't take 10 minutes out of their day to focus on themselves, as many of us here are young parents?
Well, to your point, I think, if you can't take 10 minutes, then take 5 minutes. So I think the lesson there is just start in a place where you get to spend time with yourself, interact with yourself. Like, how do you grow self-awareness? How do you get to know somebody? You would, take them out for a cup of coffee, sit there, enjoy your time with them for 3 hours, talk about stuff, right? How do you get to know yourself? Well, using that same analogy, you would go to the coffee shop and just sit there and live in your thoughts, right? Which might be very scary for a lot of us, and very scary for me too, right? Who knows what goes up in that brain? And so my suggestion would be find time that is intentional for you to get to know yourself, do whatever you want, get to boredom, whatever that looks like. If it's an hour, like I'm a big fan of, having no obligations in a certain time frame, an hour, a few hours, 4 hours, half a day, where you have no responsibilities, no expectations, and you get to sit in your own thoughts and do what you want to do. I think that's been very valuable for understanding your own motivations, because I was that guy that was like climbing the wrong mountain for a while. I was like, let me own 10 dental offices and let me, sell the high EBITDA. Well, I was that person, and I forgot to enjoy the journey portion of it. I didn't know myself well enough.
You and I had spoken recently as I was reflecting on a Friday. This happened maybe 3 months ago. I had a Friday where I found myself at my house alone with the dogs, which was a rather surreal feeling. But it was rather unsettling, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't really have any super important things to do for work. There were no patients that were barking at my email. For all intents and purposes, I had quote unquote free time. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, in great part because a lot of the work you and I do together and a lot of the talks that we have allow us to kind of see these moments as they arise and try to make sense of them. I can't tell you how unsettled I was, and what I had realized was I hadn't practiced the power of now, to use something from Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle, for those of you who don't know, is an author who talks a lot about being present, and he's rather eclectic and out of left field, but he talks a lot about developing the skill of not thinking about anything, and it's one of the hardest things I've had to do since that day. And I had a repeat of that day about 2 weeks ago. And it was still rather unsettling, but I felt a lot more at peace because I had practiced what it means to actually not feel like I have to do something, or think about what I did the week before and try to better that. That's just how my brain always works. And I think as professionals, we all march to the beat of that drum to some capacity. But learning how to just completely turn it off, and the skill of just being completely present, is what meditation is, to kind of bring this, kind of full circle to meditation. How do you practice that art of being present?
Yeah, it's definitely a muscle, just like happiness and fulfillment. We tend to think of it as like a very passive process. It's highly active, especially if you want to go deeper into those types of emotions. Within meditation, there's like a million different styles of meditation. I myself hired a meditation coach, and to understand their style of meditation. And I would say pick the thing that serves you the best, but to be present is to, let's define it, being present. If you're sitting outside, what is being present? Well, present has to do with intentionality. Like, what is the intent? Are you sitting there just to rest, right? So am I very present with resting? Or am I am I trying to practice my presence? Okay, if you're trying to practice your presence, it means that you're trying to hold your attention to an object. So that might look like, I'm going to listen and observe this one bird for like 10 minutes. I'm going to set a timer, and I'm just going to look at the bird. And then my thoughts are going to go all over the place. The monkeys are going to come in, the dental assistants, the team is going to come into my mind, that MOD, the MB2, whatever, all those things that come through my mind. Oh, wait, but I'm supposed to be present with the bird. That was my intent. So that in there lies where the practice is as you notice yourself, and there's different components to this. As you notice yourself going to different thoughts, what is your ability to bring your thought back to your original intention? So that is the practice of presence, right? Knowing that your mind goes all over the place. Can I bring it back? How do I bring it back? You know? Man, I'm like kicking myself. I forgot my meditation coach's name. You've met him, I think, Nick. I forgot his name, but he's the guy that went off into the wilderness for 3 years and didn't have human contact. And he's like teaching us how to like live in your own brain, which is like
Will.
Yeah, Will Duncan. That's right, Will Duncan. He also, fun fact, he trained the Phoenix Suns the year that they went to the finals. So I give him credit. I'm like, yo, man, you're the reason why that they went to the finals there. But so his style of meditation, he defines meditation as one specific style. And that's called object of focus meditation. And the purpose of object of focus meditation is to purely level up your presence. It's an active process. It isn't easy. It's uncomfortable. It's supposed to be uncomfortable with this style of meditation. So if you're courageous, then I'll say jump in, but if you feel like meditation is a challenge, I probably wouldn't start here because it's a little funny, but hey, if you have the courage to jump in, I would go for it. Level up your presence, right? So let me start off by saying, let me start off with the meditation, then we'll go to the benefits of it. So object of focus meditation is you're focusing on an object, a somatic feeling, either in your core or in your nose. So when you breathe out, you know how you can feel the feeling of the air being released. So you focus on that feeling. You breathe in and out and you focus on that feeling. And when your thoughts go away, you bring it back. You acknowledge like, hey, I noticed that I thought about the cars. I'm going to bring my attention back to that physical feeling of the nose. So that exercise allows you to level up your presence because you're constantly going away from the thought and bringing it back. So I'd say any exercise where you're choosing something to focus on and then your brain goes somewhere else, try to bring it back to whatever thing you're focusing on. That directly levels up the muscle of presence. And what you'll notice about presence is, again, to your point, you notice that the world slows down. When someone speaks to you, you start to see their facial expressions a little bit more. You can read the energy better. You can choose to stay present in the conversation, or you can choose to move into a different place. This is the power of having heightened presence, We all know people that like are very present in their conversation with you. They just feel like they're into you, right? That's the kind of benefits that you could get out of like leveling up your presence. So,
beautiful.
Yeah.
Well said. Well,
but there's some styles out there. Don't try that. If you're trying out meditation, like try something a little bit easier. I would say something that like feels good, and then get into it that way. Because this is like it's like more like training, like working out, right? And working out sometimes doesn't feel good. And if you want to develop the habit, then start with some sort of meditation style that you enjoy, like breathing. Oh, breathing feels good. Let me focus on good feelings. Let me breathe and focus on breathing. Like that might be a good meditation kind of style to start out with.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Andrew Huberman has I don't know if you know the name of it. It's
Yoga Nidra.
Yoga Nidra, yes. And there's another name for it, but that is what it is. Where, it's a lot of body scanning. It's I would say a nice entryway into the world of meditation, in a very powerful sense. Well, Peter, we're wrapping up on the hour here, and we always try to keep it limited to the hour so that people don't feel like they're going to get button hooked into a midnight run on these various topics. But I thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge here. We only scratched the tip of the iceberg, and really what tonight was really just kind of an exploration of what's possible when it comes to how we can show up better as humans for our staff, for our patients, and then when we get home at the end of the day for our family and loved ones. If anybody is interested in continuing these conversations, Peter and I, what we want to do is actually get a lot more focused and granular on these topics, as the group might find it interesting. Whether it applies to dentistry or not is not necessarily important. What's important here is, does it resonate with you? Is there something that this human, Peter Dinh, who's going out on his own frontier and he's acquiring knowledge and putting it into the cauldron of his dental practice and finding out what works and what doesn't work, we can live vicariously and learn from him. And I promise you, I've benefited immensely just from the conversation alone, as I've got several notes. Just when I thought I've heard you say everything, you said several new things. So there's a lot to unpack here. I'll send an email out to everybody here. As with any NECAID session, you guys get CE credits. I didn't advertise CE credits because I didn't want people to show up for that. I wanted people to show up to kind of open their minds a little bit and say, look, there's a whole world out there for us to better ourselves. What does that look like? What does it look like in somebody else's life that also lives the same profession and also has a busy family life? And what are the tools that you can take and make your own and cultivate them for you and your benefit? Everything that he said here is just what he does, and some of the stuff that I've shared are things that I do. I'd be excited to see if any of this applied to you guys in your own personal life. So on that note, Peter, thank you very much. Appreciate you.
It's an honor. Thank
right.
you, Nick, for having me. Appreciate you guys.
Sounds good. Everybody have a good night.